So welcome to the program, the one and only B.Moses. Let's see if you can be heard. Give it a shot.
Check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
All right, before you get started, talk a little bit about that song because I've been playing it for the intros now, but it's kind of like a live feature only because then what I do is I take it out. That way the show gets right into it. I take it out. So basically it's there for like 24 hours, you know what I mean? And then it disappears. But I think it's a great intro. So could you talk a little bit about that song first, especially in light of the conference that just happened in Philly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I say maybe a few years ago, I really got linked up with the UA community heavy. Shout out to Michelle Turner for kind of roping me in and just seeing all the great UA cats, guys and gals going hard for the Lord. I just got inspired, man, because at that point I really wasn't like rapping that much. It really lit a fire in me to really start, picking the mic back up a little bit. Not as nearly as I used to, but I'm coming a little bit more now. But I wanted to create an anthem for the UA and really just touch on some general things that kind of summarize the things we want to touch on and stand against. And also, you can hear me clearly proclaim the gospel in that song.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to highlight y'all. You see, I got you with your Street Apologist book. I got as many apologists as I could highlighted in that joint because the ultimate goal really was to obviously proclaim the gospel, show what we're all about, but then also promote platforms because a lot of the people we know and love in the UA community, there's way too many people who don't know them yet. So I was trying to do my part to introduce them through the music, and I'm hoping this joint can still get some circulation, man. I don't think it got the justice it deserved off the bat.
Well, I agree. So I was thinking that, and I was like, you know what? I should play it before some of the shows because I agree with that. Now, it's funny. It's not like we coordinated, but I got Cincinnati stuff on. You got Columbus stuff on.
I'm always going to rep. I got my Buckeye cup.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I mean, if Columbus had a major league team, I'd be wearing that instead. But to me, in Columbus, you choose one of the two teams for the majors, and I always went with the Reds. What about you?
Yeah, Cleveland and Cincinnati. I'm not a big baseball dude, but I lean Indians. I lean Cleveland sports. I'm a Browns fan, Cavs. My wife's from Cleveland, you know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
So I lean Cleveland. Matter of fact, real quick, should I X out one of these? Because I'm echoing. Does it matter which one I X out of?
Well, let's see which one looks better. So there's one, and then let me show you what two looks like. Let's see which one. I don't know why you appeared twice. I mean, I've only got you up once, though. Yeah, two is definitely better.
Is that two? Where I look darker,
the one I
darker
had
and
on,
sleepier?
this one, your initial one is better. So I can kick you out of the first one. There you go.
All right, that's cool.
Okay, so I appreciate having you on. The live chat has really been appreciating the song. They've been making comments and stuff. It's been good to see like new people catching up with the song. You know what I mean? And you are, like I said, you're hip to what's going on in the UA community. And you were one of the first people who hit me up after the Zion Lexx debate. I still intend to take some of those voice messages and make a clip out of it. I haven't done it yet, sorry. But I was like, man, I'd love to hear you talk about it before we kick off this smoke room proper. So can you share your thoughts if you still remember them? If you still remember them, that is.
Nah, and it's not gonna be long, but it's a few things that I really wanted to hit on, man. First of all, let me give them a backstory about the whole Zion Lexx thing before I go into the debate review. So, I watched the exchange with Vocab and Michael Heiser. I don't know if any of y'all saw that. It was about like an hour and a half long. I forget what the title of the video was, but Zion Lexx responded to the video. But in that video, Vocab was showing respect and even, throwing some love towards Zion's way. Like, hey, he's probably more intelligent and, than a lot of the Hebrews we talked to, etc. And I'm like, okay, I had never heard the cat before. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to check him out. Vocab, gave him some big ups. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to check him out. Listen, man, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I was extremely disappointed when I first heard his response video to the Heiser vocab video. Because first of all, there was just crazy misrepresentations on vocab throughout the entire video. And of course, he tried to make it seem like, oh, vocab's a racist. You know, that's kind of the go-to card with a lot of them. And also, in between comments, every 2 seconds, it seemed like he was hitting the button in the
Yeah,
J
yeah.
who Don Juan DeMarco every 2 seconds. Like, dude,
That's why
like, what are you
a lot
doing?
of people step to me, Zion Lexx, like I'm a regular brew. But no, I must tell you, I am not a regular brew. I've done Lexx is known for dropping bombs,
What's up?
disseminated
Oh, yeah.
information, and shredding his opponents to pieces. Right? Isn't that how he kind of? Isn't that his vibe a little bit? Right? Yeah.
Man, listen, I was so disappointed because listen, even though I knew I would not agree with him based off of what I knew about, you know, what he teaches, I was still expecting to like, you know, like, okay, this cat is respect. Man, I was disappointed. I'll just say that. With that said, I kind of had an idea going into this debate what, you know, like you may run into and expect. So out the gate, he comes in trying to poison the well by claiming that you're showing up for the wrong debate, which was extra goofy to me because as you pointed out in the debate, it said, who are the biblical Israelites of today?
Can you say that one more time?
Bible. The biblical. Not who are the historical Israelites of today, but the biblical. So he had the notion that, oh well, vocab, anybody should have known that we were going to be talking about strictly history. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, I was expecting you to go the route that you went because of the title in itself. So out the gate, he tried to make it seem like you were off base and trying to basically, you know, I don't know what word you like. Gaslight is overused, but he basically tried to, you know, make it seem like you were off from the jump, which was
Vocab
ridiculous.
is having
So
a bad day.
already. So that's the first thing I didn't appreciate, but I'll say this. You did a masterful job in your opening, walking everyone through the gospel from Abraham all the way up to the New Testament. Masterful. And of course, again, when I knew he was going to come out in his reply and try to basically crap on all of that by trying to invalidate it basically with the claims that he made. But it doesn't matter. A lot of people heard the gospel in its fullness. And that was really the point, and that's all that mattered. But it was still frustrating just from watching the debate standpoint. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people from the. It's true. People on our. A lot of the believers understood that because they saw essentially what was like a collision. They kind of saw it and they got it and understood it. I knew a lot of Hebrew Israelites wouldn't understand. At least not now, but I believe that the ones the Lord is working with, I believe they will understand it because there's a certain level of clarity with the positions being drawn out. And, you know, Zion Lexx, people have said this too, even people that were on his side. He didn't respond to even one verse, not even one. All he did is showed pictures and try to paint a narrative about what's happening in the debate. But it's like, well, are you going to actually respond to something? But he didn't respond to anything. So, oh, okay.
Yeah, like exactly. And I wrote up my notes. I said, vocab clearly exposes the carnal mind of Zion Lexx and other Israelites who want to focus on flesh and blood instead of the spiritual angle that the scriptures clearly teach when it comes to what a true Israelite is. I made notes. I was taking notes. You know what I mean? Like, and I noticed all of that, man. I knew it was going to be a lot of showmanship and, you know, whammy bammy and basically playing to his audience and just a lot of goofiness, man. Based off that first encounter I saw with his response, I knew it was going to be that way. And I was just like, but here we go. But again, you stood tall. Now I know you got a little frustrated, and I mentioned this to you And I was saying to myself, like, don't take the bait because he lied on you. We all heard you say book and not books, but he tried to make it seem like you said books. You know what I mean? Then, listen, I'm no scholar, I'm no super academic, but come on, dog. Are you trying to tell me that if you don't have a hard copy of a book, you haven't read the book? It's impossible. The whole PDF thing was silly. It was just a lot of silliness that frustrated me from where I was sitting. But you still held your own, and you did an excellent job. Excellent job in the questions, answering the questions, and all that. You stood your ground. The gospel was preached. You did a great job of responding. It's just frustrating that the debate had to go that way, and some of the pettiness and baiting and all that other stuff. I'm not feeling none of that.
Well, I do agree, and I thought you made a good review in the sense of, you were paying attention to the arguments, because I heard a lot of, I guess you could call them reviews, where people weren't really paying attention to the arguments. So I don't really consider reviews someone saying, man, so-and-so got smoked.
Yeah.
Well, okay. But there's a lot of that. It's just, okay, what's the review of it's kind of like, great movie, right, but why?
Right.
And so that's where you're like, okay, you're just cheerleading at that point. It's clear you're not actually ingesting anything. And I guess it's like, why listen if that's what you're there to do? You might as well go watch, I don't know, Power or something. Like, what's the point? If you're just gonna not actually hear. That's the point of a debate for me, is educational purposes, not so people go, man, that vocab guy's really smart. That doesn't do anything for anybody. And I don't even think people walk away with that. That's all I'm trying to get them to do. But to me, it seems clear Zion Lexx is trying to get people to walk away saying, man, that Zion Lexx sure is a sharp fella. I should take his Hebrew classes. How much do they cost again? Right?
But listen, I agree. I don't disagree with that. It's just weird, man, because it's like you got all this scripture to reference and hit on to really make your point. And it seemed like he was just avoiding the whole scriptural argument. He just kept trying to shame you for trying to give a sermon on the mount. I'm like, dude, it just blew me away. I've heard other Israelites go to the scripture and at least try to debate and argue point for point in the scripture, even if they're Hebrew hopscotch and they're still in the scripture. Like, he was avoiding it completely. And I'm just like, this is like the top dude. Like, I mean, he's intelligent. I'm not saying he's an intelligent cat. Obviously knows Hebrew, gematria, all that stuff. All that stuff is great. But to me, does it really matter if you can't even get the gospel right? Like, that's kind of really what it boils down to. So it's just like, at the end of the day, you preach, bro. You gave the gospel clearly. With these debates, you know what it is. That side is going to say they won, and this, whatever. What did you provide? You provided a lot, and I really appreciate that as a brother. So, but it was frustrating to sit through. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, I agree, but I appreciate your perspective, and sometimes it's good just to hear someone like you who's paying attention talk, because sometimes in these settings you can feel kind of isolated or alone because you're there and you see the live chat and it's all these crazy people saying crazy things, and you're like, well, what? Wait, are we in the same room? What's happening, right? And so it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to have some sanity. Let's check the live chat, see what they were saying to what you're saying. I get so excited, but it turns into the same old arguments. That's what he's talking about with Zion Lexx. Jimmy Berman says, but urban apologists are the KKK. I don't know if you heard his review where he said that I'm leading a new KKK. To me, that's when you know someone's desperate, right? Because I don't feel like you don't say that about an opponent, especially who's exegeting the text and that stuff during your debate. I feel like you don't say that unless you're desperate. Why would you say such a thing?
It's ridiculous. I saw I think a video you did recently where you played a clip of them saying that, and I just shook my head and like, come on, dog, you can't be serious right now. But unfortunately, there's going to be some who eat that up because that's just what it is.
And that's where you just see Zion Lexx talks a big game, but he's not always cracked up to be. And be honest, he disappointed me. Like, he let me down because I kind of talked him up to my audience, and I was looking for something really different. And I was like,
Yeah, I was
uh-oh.
giving you the side. I was giving you the side eye, vocab. After you pumped him up, I was like, "Come on, man!"
I was
Like,
like, they're not going to take my product recommendations anymore. Nicodemus Serpico says, wow, what an opening. He's talking about your song. And then Jimmy Berman says, I come for the show, but I stay for the flow. I think that's you right there. Benjamin Roberts says, Zion Lexx's response to the debate got recommended in my YouTube feed. Wow. Prime Minister 66 says, first time hearing this young brother. Let's see where he's at. But Prime Minister also said that song is ill. And then he dropped a super chat. But then he also said, go blue.
Ah.
Hold on. Yeah, I know, right? Hold on. I just dropped you out for some reason. Let me fix that real quick. I see you. We got our first guest in the smoke room, but hold on. Let me get through these comments real quick. Jimmy says we need to get these brothers in some leather shorts like Zion. I don't know if everyone knows what he's talking about, but I do. And then Dinu, thanks for dropping the Heiser link. And there's a couple more, but have you talked to anyone about the debate, or do you have other people besides, nerdy old me that you kind of run through stuff about this in general, out there in Columbus and all that?
Yeah, I mean, mostly on social, you know what I mean? Like in our groups, like we congregate, the Michelle Turners and the Kevin Bettons, and you know what I mean? Like we chat, we chop it up on the threads and stuff like that. So yeah, you're not the only one, but I had to get at you about it.
That's good. That's good. So when are you gonna go to one of these apologetic conferences like just happened to Philly?
I went to the one in Detroit.
Tell me about it. Who did you meet out there? How was it and all that?
Oh, it was great. I finally got to meet a lot of cats in person, man. For a couple of years, it's just been straight online and building relationships, but got to meet D New in person. Finally, the great D New, Damon Richardson, all the Detroit cats, Michael Holloway, Dez, Chris, Detroit, Apologists in Detroit. They were very, very hospitable. I rocked my old state gear hard too. They gave me some stank eyes and tried to threaten me a few times, but I stood strong. But it was dope, man. It was great, great stuff. Took my wife as well, and we had a great time. Had some really good pizza. I think it was called Happy's Pizza, wasn't it? Really, really good Detroit style pizza.
How many potholes did you count?
Man, it was like 216 potholes, like just on the way to the church. I mean, like it was 8 Mile, like for real. Like I saw D12 out there.
You saw some burning houses, some abandoned buildings, a kid with a machete without a shirt on. It was only 5 years old on the corner.
I saw Cheddar Bob getting shot or shooting himself. All that, bro. It was terrible.
Oh my goodness. Have you been to Michigan before for any particular reason?
I went to Detroit years ago when I was in network marketing, like prepaid legal. This was like 20 years ago.
Okay.
I went for a conference. That was the only time I went to that state up north.
So do you want to tell people before you leave, your views on Michigan or anything like that?
Oh, you don't want to hear that. They're going to be mad at me. I'll just say this. There's a nice Walmart-looking asterisk next to that ship they just won. The NCAA hammer is coming, all right? Y'all can play and act like it ain't. It's coming. So you better prepare yourself. You see all them coaches is fleeing the scene. They all banged out. Harbaugh was like, come with me if you want to live. And they went with him. I'm telling you, your reign on the top was short like leprechauns. All right, it's about to be over. Y'all going 4-8 next year. All right, and that ship just might get revoked or get vacated, I would say. And we got our I don't want to say swag back, but just know in 2024 we getting that ship. Y'all see them boys that just transferred to Ohio State and all them boys that came back to win a ship. So y'all have fun for a few years after getting beat 20 straight years in a row, but now it's back to the regular scheduled programming with O State on top.
Man, did you have that written down or something, or
No,
what?
no. Oh yeah, I got a podcast, Buckeye Sports Talk with B.Moses. So this is what I do. This is just what I do. You know what I mean? So didn't have that written down, but yeah, I have fun with this.
All right, man. Well, yo, thanks for coming through. When are we going to see you debating somebody?
I don't know. Is that something? Am I a debater? Like, I don't know. I've
I
never
mean, don't you
debated
debate
before.
like Michigan fans and people about the Big
I
Ten all the
mean,
time?
yeah, I mean that ain't nothing compared to an actual like legit professional debate. I mean that's a whole nother level. I would have to, you know, am I good at that? Like I've never done that before, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see.
Well, we could start you off with some low level, you know, some,
It,
you know.
hopefully, I can make somebody rage quit in my first debate. Never mind.
Okay. Well, you got high goals, bro. All right. Well, man, I like
All right, bro. I
I
appreciate it.
love the song, and I like the music, and I'm gonna keep on pumping it. You know what I mean? I'm gonna keep on playing it, and I appreciate the review and everything else. But Prime Minister said maybe this dude isn't as cool as I thought.
Hey, we still brothers in Christ, man. It's all sports banter. I hate your team, but I love you. Right? Ain't that how it works? Go Bucks. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
All right, man.
All right, bro. I appreciate you, man.
Hey, man, I appreciate you too, man. Thanks for coming through, and God bless and everything you got going on. We'll talk again.
All right, you too. Peace.
Yeah. All right, you know what he's got to get when he goes out. That right there. Yeah. That's my man, B.Moses. Whenever I, go to Columbus, we always link up. Great guy in every way. Welcome to the program, Odemei. How do I say it?
Odemai.
Odemai. Okay, I'm going to change the name on the screen. Go ahead. Let's talk.
What's good, Vocab, man? Great debate.
Thank you.
The only thing I would say concerning the debate, I was hoping that because I feel like the community, they pretty much, we all know where Zion stands when it comes to just the how the Israelites look, right?
Right.
We all know that was pretty much going to be his stance. I was hoping that he was going to pull out more scriptures for sure. But concerning just, I guess, the apologetic stance when it comes to like the 144, like I was hoping that you guys would go into that, you know. And I also had another question after that, if you could just give me some understanding about just like you know, the 144,000 and how does that apply with the church, and if that has anything to do with bloodline Israel.
Sure, I can. Christians do disagree about the 144,000. And what I would want to say before...
Camera got me super close, bro.
Oh, I'll scoot you back. Hold on, I'll scoot you back. Just give me a second. I didn't mean to... It's just because you got your camera vertical, I think it kind of ended up like that. There.
Yeah, that's a little better, for sure.
Christians are, for lack of a better word, allowed to agree, or I'm sorry, allowed to disagree about this, I believe. So it's not a key doctrinal issue. It's a matter of interpretation of a few important passages in Revelation. But it's a future thing, I also believe. Now, there's Christians who try to want to put it in the past. I don't put it in the past. And so within that, I try to allow a lot of leeway in how a person would interpret it. Because with future prophecy, as long as we don't do certain things, for example, deny the existence of heaven, deny the existence of God's reign on earth. And I don't mean the millennium. I'm saying, heaven on earth, which Revelation pictures at the end. As long as we don't deny the Lord is coming back, as long as we don't deny the final resurrection, as long as we don't deny the final judgment. There's like these key things that are really unavoidable, that every Christian should say, I get that. Now, they may have some differences in how they shake it all out and the timing, things like that. I think that's fair. So my view of prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet is Christians should be very humble because we recognize this has not happened yet. So we're not reading something with the same level of certainty and clarity as something that has happened. So the death of Jesus on the cross, the whole tail end of all four Gospels is about it. There's prophecy about it, and then it's spoken about all throughout the rest of the New Testament. There's a certain level of clarity that's demanded by that level of data versus New Testament prophetic interpretation. That's my general approach to it before I say stuff, because I feel like people get caught up and start kicking people out who don't have the same view as them. So I was raised dispensational, and if you're raised dispensational, then you see this 144,000 passage, which I'll read in a second here, as literally being Israelites who are blood descended, who somehow God calls out, and then they're basically going to be this sort of army of Jewish evangelists. That's usually how dispensationalists would see these guys. They're these actual virgins who are called out, and they're going to be this army of evangelists for this like end times revival, especially towards Israel. Something like that is a general
Well, the
dispensationalist.
elect. I think that's the elect.
Well, not
No?
on the dispensationalist understanding. That idea of the 144,000 being elect, the only people I ever hear push that are Hebrew Israelites or Jehovah's Witnesses who have a similar idea. So Jehovah's Witnesses, in their interpretation, see the 144,000 as these special people who are guaranteed a spot in essentially the heaven above, while the others who are not part of that 144,000 are going to be on earth. And that's why the pictures in Jehovah's Witnesses literature show people picking apples off trees and stuff, because in their mind, there's kind of, and I'm not saying I got their eschatology exactly right, but in their mind, there's sort of, you're up there with Jehovah type of thing if you're 144, but if you're not, then you're down here. And when they do communion, historically, only those who are considered to be part of the 144 can take it. So they do communion and just let it pass by everybody, because those people are all dead by now, because they had to be alive in 1914, and anyone alive in 1914 would be 110 years old now. So I doubt there's any Jehovah's Witnesses who are that age. Now, the elect within Christianity is sort of a different issue. That relates more to Reformed or non-Reformed views about what you mean by the elect. So usually people don't see this 144,000 as a separate group called the elect. Hebrew Israelites do, though. They think the elect are these 144,000 of them who are sealed in the end time. So they believe what they're bringing to pass, if they're 12 tribes type Hebrew Israelites, meaning one Westerners, they believe this is happening now. They're gathering the 144,000 for the end times to happen. That's what they think. But that's never been a historic Christian interpretation, basically. So let me read it, and I'll show you what I think it is, because I haven't given what I think it is yet. So we're starting in Revelation chapter 7 here. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the four angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads." And I heard the number of the sealed 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Now, it gives a list that starts with Judah and ends with Benjamin. Now, that's important. And in the middle is Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph. If you notice, Dan is not in that list. That is significant, that Dan is not in the list. And Joseph basically there would be understood to be Ephraim. So there's the list. It goes from verses 5 to 8. Then it says this in verse 9. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, "Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come?" I said to him, "Sir, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Verse 15, "Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in this temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." So that's all of Revelation 7. That's the whole thing there. So this is sort of an interlude in Revelation 7 from 6 to 8. And there's a couple other places in Revelation where there's interludes, specifically part of chapter 10 and then part of chapter 20. And so what these little interludes do is they explain the place of the saints during the events of the unfolding of the book of Revelation. That's what these 3 interludes do. Now with this one, and you can look at the other ones I referred to kind of see what I'm talking about there. Now, this is interesting because there's these Egyptian-like plagues that fall upon people, and similar, these seals, these trumpets, and these bowls in the book of Revelation only relate to the sinners. There are certain kind of judgment that is only falling upon sinners. Now, there's literal approaches to the 144,000, and there's more symbolic approaches, and people do differ in how they interpret this vision of the 144,000 in Revelation 7:4. And does it relate to the next vision in verse 9? My contention is that 7:4 and 7:9 directly relate. I don't see them as just being thrown together back to back. What are the 2 visions? There's 144,000 of Israel sealed, and there's the great multitude of every nation. So what I see this as is the sealing of God's international Israel. Not literal blood descendants, but basically of the saints of the church. And let me explain a little bit of why I say that. Because I understand there's people who see this as a reference. So I'm talking about Christians now. I'm not even really talking about Hebrew Israelite interpretation. It's not really, their interpretations are not really relevant in serious circles, basically. But there's some similarities between their interpretation here and dispensationalists to a certain extent, in that they're both bloodline, they're both ethnic, they're both biological. And I used to hold that position. I was raised dispensationalist. And so I said, well, this must be literal. There's 144,000. And if somebody who wasn't a dispensationalist would ask me about it back then, I would say, well, yeah, but God knows who they are. You know, God, if maybe we don't know who the 144,000 are, we don't know who's from what tribe, God would know. And I still would hold that something like that is possible, because God would know if there's to be any merit found in that in a literal way. So I'm not banging on my dispensationalist brothers and sisters there. But the more I studied the way the New Testament uses the Old Testament, the more I studied the way John uses signs and numbers and symbols in the book of Revelation, the more I understood that this is an apocalyptic book and should be interpreted according to the rules and principles of that genre. The more I understood that, I said, this is incredibly clear. This is a reference that's a symbolic number. The 12,000 neatly, cleanly from each tribe. So it's not taking into account tribal size, anything like that, because some of the tribes are rather small, some are rather large, and yet it's 12,000 from each, equals 144,000 perfectly. That sort of stands out to you as a number indicating some kind of perfection, in a sense of the perfect Israel. But I hold that the perfect Israel is the New Testament church. And that's why I say that the visions of 4, when I say 4, I'm saying 7:4 and 7:9, those 2 visions, they're put together back to back for a reason. Now, I'll explain one reason why I say that is.
I don't have this. Excuse me for a second, Vocab. I
Sure.
don't have the script in front of me, but when you say 7 and 9, you're talking about
It kicked us all off, so nothing's happened since you left. It was it's on the errors on, it was on the technical side of mine. It just happened to me too. Okay, so what we're talking about here is Revelation chapter 7, everybody. And he asked about the interpretation of the 144,000. And it is true that a bunch of people would understand this as a actual number of Jewish believers who have been brought to faith. And the question is when, and most people think that this happens after something that they call the rapture. And they think that these people were brought to heaven. After the church is brought to heaven, God removes the church from the earth. And this understanding of dispensationalism, before or during the 7-year tribulation, this is known as a pre-tribulation or mid-tribulation view. And then these Jewish evangelists are brought to faith, most likely because of that event. And the reason I say Jewish evangelists is because the idea of them being sort of described as an army, I think the dispensationalists don't take that literal, because it almost kind of sounds like that type of picture. But they're described as servants, no doubt about that. And they're sealed, and they're sons of Israel from every tribe. But here's what's interesting. And I don't hold to that interpretation. I don't believe in a pre-trib rapture or a rapture at all, unless by that you mean when the Lord returns once and for all. I hold that the second coming and the rapture, that's the same event, because we're caught up and then we come in with him to reign forever. And then there's a different question about the 1,000 years. But going back to this, it is significant that this list is Christocentric in its structure. Why I say that is because it starts with Judah. So I have looked, and as of now, and I've read other people on this, I see no examples in the whole Bible where any list is ever given where you have the 12 tribes of Israel mentioned where Judah is ever first. Now, why is that significant? It's telling you there's something irregular or abnormal or different or unique about the list. It doesn't start with the oldest. It doesn't start with Reuben. It's not in, alphabetical order. I don't know what other kind of ways you could want to put it. It's not in the order of how they marched, anything like that. In fact, it's not even, it's like, what is the order, right? And it's interesting, though, because Judah's first, and then is Reuben, the eldest. But Judah's put first. So to me, that makes it clear it's Christocentric because of Jesus, of course, is the lion from the tribe of Judah. The other thing that lets you know is that it's a different or unique or abnormal list. And so the reason why that's important, because it says this is not to be taken as a literal number of literal tribes, of literal people from the little tribes, is there's no Dan. Now, people will try to tell us a reason why there's no Dan. And okay, maybe they're right, maybe they're not right. But the fact is there is no Dan. So some of the reasons people say, well, they introduced idolatry into Israel, bada boom, bada bing. They were kind of the northernmost part, head of the northern tribes. People try to say stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know exactly. But I do know that it signals that, okay, something is different about this list. Then here's what's significant. It says, here's the main thing I'm going to draw everyone's attention to. If you haven't paid attention to anything I said in regarding Revelation 7 with the 144,000, here's something that's important. It's very important to look at this verse and what it actually says and doesn't say. Revelation 7:4 reads this way, and I heard the number of the sealed. So to me, this is the kind of like the final reason why I hold to this interpretation. I heard the number of the sealed. It doesn't say that I saw. It says, I heard the number of the sealed, which is fascinating because you might think, oh, he's hearing this number, but then he's describing it, but it says, I heard. Now watch this. Verse 4, again, reiterating, I heard the number of the sealed. And then verse 9 says, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number. Now, they just get numbered, and now they can't be numbered. If it's connected, which you have to ask yourself, why are these two things put together if they're not connected? I hold that they are connected. It's describing the same group from two different ways or two different angles, because it's very important to understand he hears the number, but then he sees the multitude. So if he hears the number but doesn't see it yet, what's he turning when he looks to see? He's seeing the actual reality of the number, which is a great multitude from every nation, tribe, and tongue. And that's because the church is the eschatological Israel, which is an idea that is found in John. We got to remember that Revelation is penned, as far as human author, by John. What does John say in John chapter 1, verse 12? He says, to them who believe, to those who believe, he gave the exousia, the exousia, that's the Greek word there, which means the right to become children of God. John starts off his gospel with that kind of talk. Right away in John 1, he says, if you believe in Jesus, you are given the exousia, the right to become children of God. And then it says, not of blood, not of the will of spirit, not of the will of flesh, but of spirit. Then it says that's how they're born. So it lets you know, this is a supernatural birth. Exousia, they're getting the right to become children of God based upon their understanding of who Jesus is, meaning their trust, their faith in Jesus. He has the same type of idea pop up in John 3. The conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, that doesn't appear in Matthew, Mark, Luke. It does appear in John. And in John chapter 3, Nicodemus says, hey, I want to get in this kingdom. I mean, this is kind of the essence of the conversation. Jesus says, yeah, you got to be born again to see it. And he's like, what? Well, I'm going to get back at my mom? So why is that significant in John chapter 3? It's significant because what it's showing is Nicodemus's lineage, that he's a Hebrew, that he's Jew, it's not enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't say you need to be born again, because it's showing the natural birth is not enough. Same idea appears in John 8. What happens in John 8? On the heels, of course, of John 7. In that whole conversation, in fact, wait, maybe it is John 7 now. I don't want to confuse myself. It's either in John 7 or John 8 now. And I do believe it's in John 8, where what Jesus says to the Pharisees, he says, hey, you don't believe because you're of your father, the devil. Oh, we're the sons of Abraham. No, you're not. If you were, you'd believe what I was saying. Whoa, okay. So what's that indicate? Your lineage is based upon your allegiance in a Johannine understanding, which is a biblical understanding. It's just John brings it out in multiple places. He brings it out in other places as well. And so I'm not going down the whole list today, but this is a very John-like idea is my point. So when we come to Revelation 7, he hears the number, but he sees the great multitude. So that's why I take it as it's describing the church as the perfect called out ones. They're described in Israel-like terms, but this list never describes Israel in any other place. And
I remember, not to cut you off.
It's okay, because I've been going a while. Go ahead, brother.
I remember GMS, they used to say, and maybe they still do, but they would refer to that number, that multitude, the tongues, the nations, and they would literally say that's still Israel, right? So I say that to I guess to make the point that what you're saying may be a little similar to the position that they hold, being that they think it's still Israel, being that, you know what I'm saying, the nations, the tongues, but they obviously exclude the rest of the people, right? And I guess it kind of makes sense that the nations and the tongues are, if this is what you're saying, is that it's kind of bulked in to this number. This number is deeper than just, like you said, John hears the number, so it's more important that he's, it's more of like I guess a metaphor.
So just based upon what he just said just now, I want to do a follow-up comment with that, which is to say, when we come to Revelation chapter 7, which is what the gentleman was asking about, first of all, I made the point that we need to have an acceptable level of allowance for different interpretations, because this is future prophecy. And I really think it's important for Christians not to be kicking people out of the kingdom, so to speak, based upon prophetic interpretation that has not happened yet. And to reiterate the points and to bring up some new ones as well, when we come to Revelation chapter 7, there's a couple things I want to continue to say. Is that essentially, when it says Israel here, it is a reference to the church, the new covenant people of God. And so when you see the 100, or rather, when you hear the 144,000, this is an international multitude. And that's why, in one sense, they're just described sort of as the international multitude. but they're also described as the 144,000 sealed. And these are complementary perspectives, both different ways to describe the church, because the church is comprised of believers from every nation, which of course includes ethnic Israel. I must bring that out just in case that is not clear. Now, here you say they are protected from the Lamb's wrath because they're part of the Lamb's flock. But notice they're still exposed to persecution by evil enemies. So on one hand, they're protected during this time of tribulation. That's verse 17 of chapter 7. But on the other hand, when you look at places like this very next list where it talks about those who were persecuted during this time, they do experience persecution at the hands of wicked men. Now, this 144,000 does reappear in Revelation 14, 1 through 4. And there the description, I think, has a bearing on the interpretation that we have drawn out and hopefully explained to some degree, even though there are some technical difficulties, again, which I apologize for. So let's take a look here at Revelation 14, the other time this appears. Here's what it says. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists. Hold on. It was like the sounds of harpist. Like the sounds of harpist. Like the sounds of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These who have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. Now, this is important because it says they're first fruits, right? Well, who's described as the first fruits? Because of Messiah, because of their association and union and lineage with Messiah, who's described as first fruits in the book of 1 Corinthians, it is the Christian church. So Revelation 14 is the other important place to go to understand who the 144,000 are. So that's why we went to Revelation 7 first, and then we jumped over to Revelation 14, the other place where this appears, and this is a vision. And this sequence leads right into the last plagues, which are described as bowls of God's wrath there in chapter 16. And
hey,
so,
Vocab.
Yeah.
Vocab, not to cut your piece. I hope I don't get cut off. I want to hurry up and get this question out before the internet runs out on us, right? Just to touch on this part where it say redeem, right? I would like for you, if you can, just give some insight. And maybe if you can give an answer or reply to Leviticus 25, and if this somehow is a precept to this word that you just said in Revelations, where you said redeem, right? So I'm hoping that you can touch on some of these points concerning Leviticus 25:44, I believe it is, where it says that you can buy from the nations, right? You still there?
Yeah. Are you saying Leviticus 25 has something to do with Revelation and the 144,000?
I'm saying that concept that we see in Leviticus 25 applies to being redeemed, because we know that when one is bought, they are redeemed. Is that somehow synonymous?
Well, I mean, so in Revelation, the concept of the Lamb purchasing the church with his blood is certainly a prominent concept. Not only in Revelation, so you see it also in Acts 20:26, where it says that Jesus, God, purchased his church with his blood. You see that same kind of concept. But in Revelation, it's made very clear that he's the one who purchased the church with his blood. So that's where the redeemed element runs throughout Revelation. It's not the only place, but focuses heavily on the idea that the Lamb is the one who is worthy because of this action. And of course, the action shows that he ends up being described as one who is slain, right? He's slain. So redeemed, the English word is translated from a number of different words in the Bible. So of course, the one in Leviticus, of course, is a Hebrew word. But when we come over to Revelation there in the Greek, we're looking now at a Greek word. So it's two different words. That doesn't mean the concept's not similar. But in Leviticus 25, which verse specifically are you talking about? I wouldn't tie these two together, but I'm trying to go where you want to go to look at this. Because just because it has redeemed, because the word redeemed is in the Bible a lot. But what verse specifically were you talking about? Are you talking about in relationship to the property?
Yep, where it says from the heathen, you can buy from them, and they could be your your property, your inheritance, or they would be inherited, and you give them to your children, and your children would inherit them. You understand what I'm saying?
Which verse are you talking about, though?
I believe it's 44. It's there in 25. It's 25, 40, somewhere over there. It's when you buy from the heathen, or either buy from the stranger.
Okay, so I'll go here,
And
but
they will be your bond servant. That's where the
yeah. So this is about the poor man and all that. So here in Leviticus 25, we're talking about now in this context, we're talking about rules governing theocratic Israel. So here we're talking about actual purchases and actual sales and actual things dealing with actual economics. In the book of Revelation, we're talking about those who have been bought by the blood of the Lamb. And it describes in that way. It literally describes. So they're not purchased with literal monies or goods. They're bought with the blood of the Lamb.
Well, see, I would look at 25 as something that kind of refers to the 144, mainly because it's talking about.
May I ask why, though? I'm going to read it. It doesn't say anything about 144,000 here. It doesn't say anything about tribes of Israel. It's not in a context that's talking about the blood of the Lamb. I wouldn't tie these together at all, but I'm going to read it, okay? If a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich, and your brother beside him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you, or to a member of the stranger's clan, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed. And what that means is bought back out of slavery. Or servanthood. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his cousin may redeem him, or a close relative from his clan may redeem him. So this is someone who's essentially bought back out. They get their freedom back. Or if he grows rich, he may redeem himself. By the way, this is fascinating because this shows that you have instances here where a stranger or a sojourner living amongst Israel actually could have servants who are Israelites. That's what it's saying.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that the law almost literally is saying that everyone is saved in the house of Israel once they are bought. You know what I mean?
No.
I guess the question that I would...
But brother, this isn't about salvation. This is about economic freedom.
Right. But let me just ask this before I go, and I'm gonna just fall back and listen. Would you say that the laws concerning inheritance, is this something that Jesus' blood has fulfilled?
No, the new covenant
concerning the law.
Every single Old Testament law, every single one has been fulfilled in Christ. And so what that means is we are not under Old Testament law in a covenantal sense. It's still God's word. It's still for our instruction. It's still important. It still reveals the holiness of God. All those important things must be said about Old Testament law. It's something that we should still be reading. All that's true. But it's interpreted through Christ and in Christ. And he interprets some of it very explicitly in the Sermon on the Mount. He shows us sort of the way it's done. That's one place. There's others. But also as we go and do the work ourselves and say, how does the book of Leviticus refer to this? And then we start looking into it that way. But this has to do with, hired workers and the year of Jubilee. And these things point to God's fairness and social justice and economic principles, and do relate in a sense to the fact that we were in bondage to sin. That's how the New Testament talks about our condition prior to Christ. And then we're bought out of sin. We're redeemed out of sin. We were enslaved and trapped in sin, and now we're redeemed. Now we're free. And that's where Revelation comes in, where it says we're redeemed or bought by the blood of the Lamb. And that does relate to those who are sealed, the 144,000, because all of them are bought by the blood of the Lamb. But I would never tie this specific passage in any kind of direct way, because it doesn't have to do with 144,000 or tribes or lists or anything like that. I wouldn't tie it in per se, just because the concept of redemption is there in some way. Because
Well, we know that there will be servants and specific prophecies, like concerning in Isaiah, where it says, you know, the Gentiles will be servants to the Israelites, right?
well,
No,
I don't know.
because let me just say this though,
Yeah, I know
let,
Isaiah 14. I know how Hebrewites interpret it, but
right, and they're
since we
quick
do
to
everything
say
through,
that they'll say
go
that
ahead.
this particular scripture is saying that, and concerning Leviticus 25, they would like to say, see, this is God telling you that I'm going to be a slave owner, and that this represents chattel slavery. To where I would disagree. To where I would say that this is showing us that God redeems everyone who wants to be a part of His household. So I'm saying that this is kind of showing us that the 144, those who are chosen as, you know, the representation of the 12 tribes, these men, right, they will be the ones who are the government and will ultimately have servants in their house.
But
So I'm
hold
saying
on.
that,
Can I stop you
yeah,
there, brother?
yep.
They're described themselves as servants.
What's that? What are you saying?
The 144,000 themselves are called servants.
Facts.
But you're talking about how this means they're going to have servants in the kingdom. But check this out. Look at what Revelation 7 says. Until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. They're servants. They're not described as those who have servants.
Well, we also see where Christ says that, don't you know that you will be sitting on the throne, judging the 12 tribes, something to that effect.
Right, but who's he talking to there?
Who is he talking to?
And there he's
Who
talking
is he talking?
he's talking to the disciples, the 12.
Right. Oh, got you.
Because the foundation of this place is both the Old Testament and the New Testament, in a manner of speaking. You know, it's multi-covenantal because it's God's full picture, God's story. So it's the 12 tribes of Israel. That's where you have the gates. But then you also have the foundation is described as the 12 disciples. And then you also see places where the prophets are described sort of as the foundation in other New Testament texts. And so in that particular place you're meaning, he's talking to the disciples only. But notice this is 144,000. If it's literal, there are questions that have to be asked if someone holds to a literal interpretation of Revelation 7 and 14, such as, are they literally virgins? And if so, why do they need to be virgins? Number two, why are they described as servants, especially if the understanding is they're going to have servants? Number three, why is Judah first in the list, which is totally irregular? Number four, where is Dan? Those are some of the questions I would ask someone who holds to a literal interpretation of Revelation 7.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, but at the same time, when we think about, or if we consider some of the rhetoric that the One West guys say, such as the heathen will cleave, the heathen will cleave, the heathen will cleave, and we see this type of verbiage in, you know, certain books like Ezekiel, where it says, I believe it's Ezekiel 14, and it says that the stranger will cleave to the house. You know what I mean? So just going back to ethnic Israel, I mean, if we connect the dots with the particular precepts, and we connect those dots, we see that it is somewhat a genetic Israel, right? Or
No,
bloodline Israel.
no,
No.
not with all due
So
respect,
how would the
not
heathen
at all.
cleave? That's what I'm saying. How would the
Because
heathen
we don't need to
cleave?
cleave to Israel, brother. We cling to Christ. We're not in the old covenant. We're in the new covenant. Clinging to Israel is a waste of time. Let me tell you why. Israel has never fulfilled the mission she's supposed to fulfill. So clinging to her is like jumping on the Titanic right after it hit the iceberg. You ain't going nowhere but down, brother. Also, if you're going to cling to Israel, you look at Israel and what she has to do for herself, right? I'll tell you what she has to do. She is a high priest who has to go in there once a year and make atonement for himself first, because he's a wicked sinner too, and then make atonement for the sins of the nation and do a whole scapegoat thing every year. And he has to do it every year till he's done, and the next guy does it. Why? Because Israel's sins have not been taken care of yet in an old covenant context. And yet then Jesus says, one who is greater than the temple is here. He's talking about himself. He refers to himself as the temple a number of times. And then he even says he's greater than those who work in the temple. He says, hey, they're working. I'm allowed to work. God's working. He's showing that he's greater than the temple and its workers. And then you say, well, that's interesting. And then you go forward a little bit and you see how the New Covenant writers interpret the life and death and burial of Jesus, and he's described as a high priest. He's the one that we cling to because he's the one who makes intercession on our behalf. Why would I cling to Israel when Israel needs to cling to Jesus? Why don't I just cling to Jesus? He is the one mediator between God and man. Israel's not a mediator. It never was. Even in Israel, not all Israelites were mediators. Only those of the certain types of Levites were. And they had to pay for they had to atone, do an act symbolic of the atonement for their own sin. So you can't cleave to them. Who do you cling to?
You know what's funny? I watched a video. Some guy was saying that those who would be considered the Levites, and referring to the 12 tribe, the 144, he was pretty much making the case that those who believe in Christ, those will be the Levites, and the rest of the tribes would be the lineage, which was just kind of a little fascinating to me,
Who
because
said
the way
that?
I
Who said that
just
now?
some video that I seen that was just floating around YouTube.
Well, you know what?
Which it was just kind of crazy.
So I don't follow that, but maybe there's one element of truth to whatever that person was saying, in that when you go to the New Testament, I would hold in 1 Peter 2 that Peter is describing the New Testament church in terms that were only applicable for Israel in the Old Testament. A nation, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. Because the reason I say that is in 1 Peter 3, it's important for people to see. He says, if you suffer as a Christian. So if 1 Peter's talking about Christians, and he says, if you suffer as a Christian, so he is, why does he say in the chapter before it, they're a kingdom of priests, a royal priesthood, and all that stuff? He is describing the church in Old Testament Israel terms, but now he's applying it to the New Testament church. Now, someone may say, yeah, what about the beginning of 1 Peter? I know that. That doesn't negate the interpretation. It either says he's writing to Israelites, which is fine because to the Jew first, or he's yet again doing the introduction to say this is a way to understand what the church is. But coming back to that, maybe there's some truth to that, but not in the sense that we intercede for anybody unless we're taking into account their church's earthly ministry as priest right now. What I mean by that is we are supposed to be, in a sense, a go-between the unbelievers of the world and God. Not that we are paying for their sins or pointing them to us as intercessors, but that we are, in a sense, offering them up as sacrifices to God. And that sounds weird, but Paul literally says that. I'm going to show you here in a second. I want to get your opinion. And by the way, it's interesting. Somebody said you talked to Ariala before. Is that true?
Yep. Yeah, I did. I also spoke to Osh.
Oh, the fall guy.
Yep.
How do those things go? How do those things go for you? I haven't seen them.
You know, they love to do the the name calling and the slandering. That's the word I'm looking for. It's funny, man. I first did the I did a discussion with Ash concerning Leviticus 25 and if the Gentiles could be bought, and how does the inheritance work? And I was making the point that there is no chattel slavery within within that scripture when Leviticus 25. I don't believe that is saying that God supports chattel slavery, right? And the conversation went pretty smooth, man. It was very brotherly, brotherly content. I was referring to him as brother. He would refer to me as brother. But as soon as I had a conversation with Ariala, I told him that my father was from Guyana, and he was like, "Oh, so you're East Indian? You're an Elamite, huh?" So they just went crazy. Osh starts calling me, "Oh man, the brother didn't even tell me that he was an Elamite, and I can't believe I stood up on a discussion with him for that long." And it's like, damn, bro, I thought we was judging each other by the spirit, you know?
They try
Because
to
when I
say you're
first
an
talked to you, we
Elamite?
was brothers at first, and then as soon as he got the word from Ariella, oh, now I'm a dirty Elamite. I'm like, wow, bro, okay.
Okay. Wow. My bad. Jeez. That's really what
Yeah,
they
so
pulled on you?
oh yeah, you know how they get down, man. You know how they get down. But that's why I've been asking a lot of people about Leviticus 25, man. And I definitely just wanted to hear your stance on it a little more further. I think I've heard you speak to those things concerning the hired servant, the bond servant, and how you would say that you are someone who does not believe that the Bible supports chattel slavery, right?
Yeah, I would say the Bible does not support chattel slavery. Of
Right.
course, I can't deny in the Old Testament forms of servanthood or slavery are certainly regulated, but there's a lot of stuff in Old Testament law that's essentially regulation of sin in a fallen world. You know what I mean? Because if you read the garden, the account of the garden in Eden, you see that there's no design for a man owning another man in there. We're made in the image of God. It says, you're going to, even under the curse conditions, you're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow for your food. Even under that understanding, slavery doesn't make sense because you're working for someone else's food. And you look and you say, okay. And then, of course, slavery is a curse. What I mean is, it's something that happens when bad stuff's happening. For the Israelites, hey, you're going to go into slavery when you're acting up. Slavery is a condition that happens to other kingdoms and empires when they fall. Slavery is not seen as a good thing. Now, we also see that God can sovereignly use slavery like anything for his own purpose, regardless of if a person, quote, did anything wrong or not. Joseph did not do anything to deserve slavery. You could say maybe he was pompous or something, although the text never says that. That's sort of reading into it. You're going to bow down to me. Whoa, it's true, by the way, of course. But he had to go into slavery, but it was all based upon false presupposition. But what does Genesis 50:20 says? He says, you intended it for evil, talking to his brothers, but God intended it for good to save many alive. And so my point by that is God can even redeem our suffering. And so that's important too. But no, the Bible does not support the idea that chattel slavery or any kind of enslavement of the human is a good or ideal condition. In fact, in the New Testament it says, hey, if you can get your freedom, get your freedom. Even the same author who says, hey, slaves, obey your masters, is the same author who says, if you can get your freedom, get your freedom. Same author, Paul, I'm talking about, is the same person who in 1 Timothy said, hey, if you're a man stealer or a kidnapper, you deserve death. This is all the same author. So there's a full panorama there. And you see that when you go all the way to the end in the book of Revelation, there's no suffering. So how you can have slavery, beating people and whipping people, and there's no suffering, there's no pain in the final state of things. And so what we see really is people that push slavery in the kingdom or something, you know what? It shows that they do not have an objective moral problem with slavery, even though it is a product of a fallen world, and they should. It shows that they just want to be the slave master. And that's a carnal impulse, because what does Christ say? Don't be like the Gentiles who lord their authority over each other. With you, the greatest is going to be the servant. The first, last, and the last first. Jesus has a totally different kingdom ethic than the world has. So the world's ethic is, I'm stronger, I'm better, I'm smarter, I'm going to take advantage of you. Christ says, no, not so with you. And you don't lord your authority over others. So the whole, it's all carnal. What the Southern slavers did and what the one Westerners want to do and everybody else in between, it's all carnal.
Yeah. We're going to do the same thing that they did to us. I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, bro. Wow. But hey, before I go, Vocab, just concerning you brought up the
And then
part
I got
where
the next person. I see you, Octane X. Go ahead, though.
it says the Gentile will wax rich, or the heathen will wax rich, and you know where I'm going, right? Where
You
the
talking about
stranger
Deuteronomy
wax
28?
rich.
Talking about Deuteronomy 28?
No. Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25, where it says.
Oh, you talking about when they get rich and they have an Israelite servant?
Exactly. So that clearly shows that one who was a part of the household, and that God was never excluding the strangers, that they would ultimately have riches within the house of Israel, right?
So yes, but
Because when one is bought, they're ultimately given property, right?
under the Old Testament code, a sojourner or a stranger who it's silly to think it's anything else other than a non-Israelite, regardless of whatever they say, they can have as a servant an Israelite. But notice how that's not God's permanent intention. So it's true, it says they can become rich among you. So that means they are able to flourish just like an Israelite. Although there's certain things that a non-Israelite, even if he is attached to Israel under the Old Covenant, could never do. For example, be a priest. That's not going to happen no matter what. But there's a lot of things they would have access to. And this is why we say the new covenant is better than the old covenant. And you are right. One of them is to have some wealth and all that. In fact, even look at Abraham. He had a servant, Eleazar. He wasn't a descendant of him, and yet he was going to pass on all the stuff. He kind of ran his house, all kinds of stuff. Very interesting situation. I believe I'm saying the gentleman's name right. He's not a blood descendant of Abraham. But going on more to Israel proper, what you're saying is right, but I still want to draw to attention that even there, God never intended the actual servant part to be permanent. Because he seen there's an idea that it's like you want the Israelite to be bought out of servanthood. And indeed, you even give the non-Israelite an option to be a lifelong servant or not. That's where the earring or the awl in the door comes to. But they have a choice there. All that's very significant. But all that really is not all the way it's all that's not intended to be a permanent state, because theocratic Israel is not the ideal state. People just really need to understand the most ideal state we're aware of that we've had in our history as humans is in the Garden of Eden. But that's not the best. The best is in the city of heaven at the end. And I appreciate your questions. There's one verse.
Vocab. Hey, Vocab. Real quick. Let me just get a yay or nay from you real quick. Was Caleb an Israelite?
Caleb was a Kenizzite.
Just real quick.
No, he's a Kenizzite. He's not an Israelite.
Yes or no? Was he or no?
No, he's not. No.
What about Elijah?
I think Elijah was. You're talking about because he's a Tishbite? I think he was still an Israelite.
Yeah.
He seems like he's a Northern Kingdom Israelite. I'm pretty sure he's a Northern Kingdom. Look, one Westerners go crazy if I say something like this. Under Old Testament covenantal norms, I would be shocked if as a permanent prophet you had a non-Israelite. Now we see Balaam sort of as a wicked backwards prophet, temporarily getting some prophecies right, but it's not like a permanent office with Israel. I would be shocked to have a non-Israelite as a prophet under Old Covenant norms. So I don't think but with Caleb, I don't think there's any question, because it says who he's related to, and then they always bring this up. They'll say, "Well, look, he's described as being in Judah." Yes, but they need to read the rest of the Old Testament law regarding strangers who are amongst you. It says that you give them, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but this is in the text. This is in there. It says that you give them a partial of land with whatever tribe they're hanging out with. Now that's a paraphrase, but it talks about they have an allotment too. It talks about strangers having an allotment of land. And by the way, that makes sense, because you couldn't have the situation in Leviticus 25 you mentioned without somebody having an allotment of land, because they wouldn't have any land to have their servants on in the first place. So it's clear and it's obvious. Caleb definitely not an Israelite, just like Uriah is not, just like
Elijah. Hey, look, Hey, look, Elijah was Caleb reincarnated, bro.
Okay. I don't know about all that.
I'm
But yo,
messing with you, man. Hey,
let's
I appreciate you. I appreciate you. I'm gonna fall back and I'm gonna listen, man.
Yes,
Thank you.
sir. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but I appreciate you
It's all
coming
good,
on.
bro.
And while you're leaving, I'm going to read that one last passage I brought up, but I didn't get to, which is Romans chapter 15. And then Octane, I'm bringing you up. Romans 15:16. Listen to the way Paul describes his mission, because this goes back to the part where it's talking about people in the church as Christians having sort of a, for lack of a better word, how do I say this? A priestly ministry to those who are not believers. And here's what it says in Romans 15. By the way, Octane, you are on now. It says this. This is important. Check it out. Right on. I have written to you very boldly by way of reminder, because of the grace given me by God to be a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles in the priestly service of the gospel of God, so that the offering of the Gentiles may be acceptable, sanctified by the Holy Spirit. Now, that's very fascinating. First of all, it's Trinitarian, mentions God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. But second of all, notice how he describes his ministry as a priestly service, but it's in relationship to the gospel. It says, I bring the offering of Gentiles that it may be sanctified and acceptable. So there's a sense in which the New Testament church are priests in that sense. But go ahead, how you doing, Octane? Good to see you tonight, man. Let me give you the applause, and I'm going to change the name on the screen, my friend.
Good. What's up, Vocab?
What's
up? Sorry. I just wanted to ask a question because you would probably know the answer better than I would. But because I live in California and San Diego specifically, but I just found out that they passed immoral law. I don't know if you can look on it. It's
Wait
AB
a minute.
957.
You're telling me in California they passed an immoral law?
Well, they passed multiple immoral law, but this is by far the worst one. And I'm just trying to reconcile, or not reconcile, but how to deal with it as a Christian. Pretty much is that the state can take away our kids if we do not agree with gender affirming care.
Oh, I've actually heard about this. Al Mohler, I believe, has talked about this. It's a fascinating thing.
That stuff.
Yeah, California.
So how
law.
can we as Christians, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm looking at Romans chapter 13, and it says, let every soul be subject unto the highest power, for there is no power but of God. The power that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves judgment. For rulers are not to terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, an avenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's minister, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues tribute to whom tribute is due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor.
Yeah,
that passage pretty much like we're not supposed. That passage pretty much states like we're not supposed to be afraid of the government. Government's supposed to like treat law-abiding people, right, and should be afraid is evil people that commit crimes and just do wreak havoc, and I'm just like, I guess somewhat with anxiety ever since about this, having the high possibility of my kids being taken away if I don't, um, God forbid, if they ever get tricked into being a different gender that they're not,
Right.
it's very concerning because it has already happened to multiple parents in California, and it's like the most devastating thing, and it just makes me sad. It's just like how can we Christians, instead of just taking it, like I'm not saying like fight back violently, but what can we do? Do we just like move and like what's a good Christian perspective? Because honestly, in California, I feel like me personally, I feel like we're like alienated. It's like, especially I'm like 33 and it's hard to talk to people in my generation because
Right.
a lot of them believe in the science. They don't believe in God, which is unfortunate. Even at work, I give the gospel to people to the best of my ability. And I say, some of them called me crazy, and I said, well, I don't believe I'm crazy. People that believe a man that can get pregnant, that's crazy. But it's just, that I'm just saying, like how am I crazy because I believe in God, but yet, people out here in California society thinking that a man can get pregnant. Like, well, who's the crazy one? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's just the reality. Like, California has distorted the reality so bad lately that it's not like, as a Christian, I see it more than I ever before, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be political or anything like that. I'm truly not. But California has gotten so bad that it has not, like, other people from other states do not know. And Christians out here have been really getting, in a way, persecuted because even in our workforce, I work in the hospital. I have a high risk of losing my job if I do not say, if I misgender somebody in
Right.
my workplace, I can lose my job because I misgender. And I told my coworkers, I said, if I ever, don't be surprised if I get fired because I will treat them with respect and everything, but if you're a man, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to call you a man, like whatever your name is, or he, or you
Well,
know. But
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
California's lost.
One thing, but it's only gonna. There's only so much you can do. But the one thing that we can encourage Christians to do who are in that situation. Now, the thing is, it's not like they're unaware of this idea. Is you use the person's name instead of this gender identity that's been constructed. The problem is it's not
Hmm.
always possible, and there's times where they essentially try to force you to recognize a gender, unfortunately. So but if
Yeah, they've
a
been
name
doing that.
is, there's a certain level of arbitrariness to a name. So I encourage people in that situation to try to use the name as much as possible, regardless of what the name is. Because, for example, is Pat a male or female name? Okay, you see what I'm saying? That's not a fixed category like he and she. Now, within that, I hear what you're saying. There's a few things, and I'm going to read an article from World in a second here because I encourage every single person who's a Christian to subscribe to the World podcasts that are available on all the podcast platforms. And also, if you are into print magazines, to also subscribe to World Magazine. It is the best Christian news source, hands down, professional, intelligent, accurate, good analysis. So I'm going to read something from them because when we get into stuff like this, I don't merely want to state my opinion, although that's partially what I'm doing now. But I agree with Mohler, who's spoken on this type of thing a lot. And what he said is, in the future, most likely there's going to be certain professions that are essentially going to be closed off to Christians, especially in relationship to healthcare, because there's a tendency to try to force Christians to
Yeah.
do things like come out of medical school and before you can get a profession in a place, sign something, say you were willing to be part of abortions. That kind of thing happening more and more is going to force Christians out of certain professions. We've already seen it with things that are kind of trivial. Cake makers. You have
Yeah.
to write this
Yeah.
message on your cake. You have to write this message on your cake. That kind of thing is not going to go away. Regardless of any one legal battle that we may win in the name of religious liberty, There's always going to be the next one because these people are tireless because they have no God. And so the religion essentially is leftist secular politics. And so we have to understand that and recognize that even when they lose,
Yeah, and
they're not going to
crazy.
give up. So we have to understand that and say, what do we do? So first of all, you do what you can, but once they are forcing you to affirm something, that's where we have to bow out. And it's not easy. It may involve moving. It may involve switching professions. It's very serious. But when we look at the history of the church, this is something the church has faced this before. Now, not obviously the transgender issue specifically. This is a new level of insanity that godless humanity has adopted, right? But these types of things are something we've always had to face. Can I read this to you? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this. I fear for not myself but my kids, and I say this because I don't think a lot of people from other states know this, but under this AB 957 in California, if a child says, and there's no restriction, so it can be from kindergarten up. It does not specify an age limit.
Yeah.
So this is the scary part though. If my child wants to be something that they're not, and they tell the counselor that they're scared to tell the parent, under this law, the counselor does not have to tell the parent anything and can automatically put the child under puberty blockers without the parent knowing.
Yeah.
And then from there, the parent will have CPS to their contact to their house under the LGBTQ dolphin people and try to tell, and that's how it starts, and that's how we would find out. And then if we do not succumb to it, then that's when the state will take over the child and we will lose it.
Unfortunately,
and that's
what
just
you're saying
frightening part.
Yeah, what you're saying, unfortunately, is not fantasy, but it's already current reality. And people should pay attention to the trends. California is a cutting edge for leftist policies. And so generally what happens is once California adopts something, it usually starts in California, New York. There's exceptions to that. You see leftists in other important centers of legislation and cultural producers try to imitate getting the same thing passed in their locale. And so California is the beginning, but the dominoes are going to fall where you're going to have this stuff eventually all over. So we can move around to an extent, but I believe there will become probably a time where moving to a safe haven will almost become untenable. There will be no place to hide at a certain point, I would say. And I wish, usually I don't talk this way because it sounds like crazy talk, and I've tried to be pretty measured and guarded, but I think it's reality. So let me read this article from World, because I find their I just messed up. I find their stuff helpful, and I like to point people to different resources. And this is by Ryan Baumberger, and he talks exactly what you're talking about, and he calls it exactly what it is: California's new anti-parent transgender law. In custody battles, judges can penalize parents who don't affirm pro-LGBTQ treatment for minors. There's Gavin Newsom, the man who's probably going to run for president.
Sorry, let me cut you off real quick. Today there's an effort that just broke news into California that there's a second recall effort for him.
Yeah, I know they've tried to do that. I can almost guarantee you it's not gonna happen though, bro. I'm saying it won't be successful.
We're trying.
Yeah, someone might be trying. So here we go. This is dated Wednesday, September 13th. And this is an interview where they interview him about it. And I want to read what he says as the commentator. The same political party that fights to mutilate children in the womb is also waging war to mutilate children outside of the womb. Yeah. It's important to kind of put this in perspective. The latest evidence of this violence-obsessed dogma is the passage of a bill titled AB 957 in the increasingly totalitarian state of California. By the way, I just heard that 10% of the California legislature identifies as one of the alphabet identifications. In a vote of 61 to 16 with 3 abstentions, the Democratic Party passed an outrageous piece of legislation that threatens the very nature of parent-child relationships in the state. In a custody battle, the new law gives the judge the right to penalize a parent who does not affirm bogus genders and non-biological sex. The parent could be stripped of any rights to his or her own child, including custody or visitation. So imagine, you're married and your significant other goes leftist and you have a divorce. They could pull this on you. Every vote against the unconstitutional legislation was from Republicans who make up only 18% of the legislature. Every vote for it was from the Democrat supermajority that comprises 62 seats in the assembly. So this is what happens when Democrats run wild. They go far left, hard, fast. There is no guardrail for the Democratic Party when the leftists take over. The bill is unambiguous in its direct attack on the family. You either bow to LGBTQ ideology or the state can sever your familial bond. AB 957 states, this bill, for purposes of this provision, would include a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression as part of the health, safety, and welfare of the child. And here's the thing. It's a tricky thing. They put everything on this. The second you get in the foster care adoption system or all these kinds of things, because I've had to deal with these, everything becomes welfare of the child. And any excusable thing can be done if it can be categorized under this category of welfare of the child. Obviously, we would agree we want the welfare of the child to be priority. But the thing is, they're shoving everything into this category, basically including stuff that doesn't belong in this category, as you can see by this bill being passed in the California legislature. Continuing on, so if one parent is dead set on amputating his daughter's breasts due to the child's public school-induced confusion, the other parent who opposes that life-altering harm could be considered unfit. So insane, but this is where we're at. In that case, the state would be encouraging child abuse. How did it doesn't matter what two people choose to do in the privacy of their own home turn into politicians' public meddling into others' homes? Because if you remember, the sexual revolution was predicated upon it doesn't matter what two people choose to do. The privacy of what does it bother you if two men get married? Well, the thing is, we always knew that wasn't the end of the song. That was the first verse. That's the first note. You know what I mean? Turn into where is evidence that embracing homosexuality, bisexuality, and transgender provide better health, safety, and welfare to any child? Thanks to an onslaught of propaganda from news media, social media, Hollywood, the music industry, and professional sports, children are inundated with false gender ideology and plenty of junk science. It's no wonder that, according to Gallup, 19.7% of Generation Z and 11.2% of millennials identify as LGBT. This is massive increase from previous generations. And you have to say, how is that? We're producing different. No, it's clearly media. It's clearly cultural indoctrination. Compared to that to 3.3% of my generation, that's X, 2.7% of baby boomers, and 1.7% of the silent generation. I can't be silent about this. I have worked with too many broken teens who reject another. Design led to terrible self-harm and hopelessness. This is why it's simultaneously heartbreaking and encouraging to hear the testimonies of transitioners, and there's a link there. When the state demands you can openly affirm a pro-LGBTQ perspective, shouldn't everyone question why? According to BBC investigative journalist and author Hannah Barnes, withholding transgender medical interventions for minors has never been shown to cause a higher rate of suicide. So they're trying to act like science is on their side, but it's just not true. It's skewed data, almost always. Barnes, by the way, embraces transgender ideology, but says common therapies like puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones do not improve outcomes. Puberty blockers like Lupron have known and frequent side effects such as depression, anxiety, arthritis, and bone fractures. Yet, these and many other negative psychosocial health outcomes are rarely discussed or entertained by Democratic politicians. It seems they would rather affirm feelings than confirm facts. I'm Ryan Baumberger. So that's a transcript of the interview. So I hope everyone sees by that, this is something I don't get to plug enough. There's so many good resources out here. Is World Magazine and World as a source for news and opinions. And here's the thing. And all their podcasts, which are all free. I understand people say, well, yeah, Fox News. I don't trust Fox News. I'm not saying it's the devil. I mean, MSNBC might have that category locked up. But nonetheless, it's part of the sort of secular right. And it's a hodgepodge of different things and is not really, I think, a place where Christians should look to get their stuff. And that goes for a lot of these other, right platforms that are kind of right right, but they're groundless, they're baseless, they don't have a very theocentric worldview ultimately. And so I encourage people to find something like World, which is sound journalism grounded in facts and biblical truth. So within that, I'm glad you brought that up. All I can say is there's a lot of very serious questions that Christians, and yes, you could say conservative Jews and Muslims, Catholics and others like that, but we know that usually it's evangelical Christians who are at the forefront and vanguard of a lot of these issues. And we have a lot of soul searching to do and a lot of questions we're going to have to ask ourselves and a lot of hard answers coming our way.
Yeah, and they're so quick to attack the Christian. As soon as they find out a person's Christian, oh man, they try to dig into like what type of Christian you are, like as far as like trying to see if they can put a label on you.
Yeah, did you see
in California?
The gal on, speaking of MSNBC, I don't know if you guys saw this.
Oh, Christian nationalist. Yeah, I saw that. That's crazy. She's crazy.
Says, these Christian nationalists, they believe that they have...
Vocab, did we freeze?
Not on my end. They believe that they have God-given rights. They believe that they have God-given rights. God-given rights is something that Christians have always believed, and then the other alternative is rights from the state.
Yeah.
Maybe so it's a shocking thing that she is literally, and the thing is, there's a lot of these kind of uneducated, ignorant, naive, but educated in a very limited sense, young journalists who think that way, but it's intellectually inexcusable, honestly. But there's not going to be any correction coming our way anytime soon because it's rhetorically useful and they're not interested in what the position really is or alternatives. There's not a lot of deep thinking. And that's because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, the secular worldview is what is described properly by philosophers as a thin worldview, meaning when you analyze it down, it's material. And that's really all that's ultimate, regardless of how much sense it makes or the problem that creates. It's a thin worldview. A proper Christian worldview, and perhaps other, you might say, that they get closer, theistic worldviews, but ultimately, I'm going to say yes, Christian worldview. It's a thick worldview. There's layers, there's a strong metaphysic, and there's something that ontology is attached to. It's not baseless, it's not groundless, it's not rootless, it's not floating, and it connects to something much deeper. And there's even indeed dimensions that we're not fully able to be aware of or study that are not physical or material. And in fact, I would even say that our mind relates to those and our soul, because those are realities of the human experience, regardless of what the left holding thin worldview, materialistic people hold to. So this is a real issue, and I'm going to end here with this because it's not to bang on anybody. It's just to say this is the state of things, and every person should realize this is also us outside of Christ. So imagine without the truth here in your heart and at your fingertips and being exposed to it, where would you be? Where would any of us be? We need to realize we'd be in the same place. But here Romans 1 describes the situation we find ourselves in. And here's what it says in Romans 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. This is Romans 1:18. Very fundamental verse to understanding a proper way to engage in apologetics, I would say. Romans 1:19. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. This is the great exchange. This is a lie where the creature in some sense is worshipped instead of the creator. It happens every time we worship something lesser. And that's ultimately what idols are. Idols of the mind, idols of the heart, idols. Verse 24, therefore God has given them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. That verse will land you in jail in some places on this planet if you just read that verse, by the way. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, and malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossip, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. And that's just the Hebrew Israelites. I had to throw that in there.
That's so
This
funny.
is everyone outside of Christ. Joke, sorry, not sorry. Though they knew God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval
Vocab.
to those who practice
so
them. Huh? You like that? Got to keep them on their toes. Well, listen, thank you to everyone who gave for the super chat.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I haven't done it earlier, but the dog is going to get a treat because you guys did give a number of super chats. And I do appreciate every single one of you who gave a super chat. Adrian, there you go. She's happy. Sorry I didn't do it sooner, guys. Adrian, one more. I gave her big ones. Yep, good old little Doberman. That's Adrian. I got to jam out, but it's great to talk to you, sir. Great to talk to you, brother.
Thank you too, Vocab. Have a good night, man. Thank
pray
you.
for
the
Octane
info.
out there in Cali, because what you're saying is serious stuff. I appreciate you bringing it up. Shalom. All right, y'all, this has been a great program. Sorry about a little technical stuff here and there. I'm not going to go live again maybe until Friday or Saturday, maybe Sunday. And then I am going to be going to Florida Monday. Listen, I encourage you to come to the conference in Florida, Sarasota, called Apologetic Con. If you go, be sure to use promo code Street Apologist. You will get a significant discount. And when I say significant discount, I mean significant discount. If you're entertaining going but having trouble affording it, I can't give you money, but if you contact me, I may even be able to help with something I have access to that's even better than my discount. Not paying for plane. I'm not talking about giving you money. I'm just talking about helping with registration and stuff like that. So message me, but that's if you're considering going to Apologetic Con, which I encourage you to come. Now, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have got to take off. I appreciate every single person. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of you, but I appreciate the super chats. I appreciate the encouragement. I appreciate the support, and I really do love you all. God bless. Peace out. God bless. Shalom.